Well, hello and welcome, everyone. This is Sapphire Nation podcast number 6 beginning. I'm Sapphire Ed, and we're going to be talking about how to get the most out of your gaming experience, the ability to smooth out the gaming experience. We normally have a guest that joins me, but this month we had a hard time getting the guest to line up. I guess everybody's just got a lot of activities going on. I hope you guys have over the last month. I've built in a couple of small form factor cases, getting my SFF creds going. I've built in the Cougar QBX and in the Cooler Master NR200. And so later, if you have questions about those cases, I'll be happy to answer them. So I guess let's begin with talking about what can make the best gaming experience. Now, there are a couple of caveats and variables in that. If you're a first person shooter professional gamer, then super high frame rates are very important because and super low latency because you want that ability to snapshot your target. But the truth is that's a minority in the PC gaming crowd. The majority of us, probably the most important aspect of having a great gaming experience shouldn't be high frame rates. It should be smooth frame rates, a smooth gameplay experience. And this often gets lost. And the first place I think it gets lost, it is when you start talking about FreeSync. And I'm going to begin there because there's a lot of misconceptions. So let's understand what VSync and FreeSync are. This is where the misconception begins. The purpose of VSync is to stop your computer from generating additional frames beyond the capability of your monitor to display them. So, for example, if you have a 60 hertz monitor, the purpose of VSync is to stop the monitor from displaying anything beyond 60 frames per second because it can't do it. Once it gets past that 60 frames per second, you begin experiencing something called frame tearing. That's because it can sometimes only show part of a frame before it begins showing the next frame. It can really create a mess. Frame tearing can be ugly. The idea behind FreeSync was to offer the ability to stop that by capping the frame rate at the refresh rate of the monitor. That keeps the monitor from creating screen tearing. Now, this is where the confusion comes in for FreeSync. Everybody thinks FreeSync or adaptive sync is basically it's about high frame rates, and the reverse is true. The idea of adaptive sync is to provide a variable range of that VSync capability to the monitor. So typically, if you've got a 60 hertz monitor, but you're displaying 50 frames per second, the monitor will often only display at a 45 frame rate. So you lose frames. With FreeSync, the variable range is complete. So if you've got a FreeSync range that's 144 to 30 frames per second, that's how it's measured as the range. That means anything in that range can be displayed. So if you're pushing 110 frames per second, they're going to display at 110 hertz. And the monitor is going to move up and down as it needs to keep that smooth frame rate going. The reason I say this is about lower frame rates is it's not going to break the top edge. You still got the same problem if you exceed the refresh rate capability of the monitor. You've still got the same problem that VSync was there to fix. You're going to have frame tearing after the top edge. FreeSync and adaptive sync in general is about those lower frame rates. As the frame rate drops down, the display system stays smooth. You never get those gaps in between. Everything stays smooth all the way to the bottom. Now, the question that I've heard raised more than a few times is what if it goes below the bottom of the FreeSync range? This is where a technology called low frame rate compensation comes in. So let's say the bottom of your FreeSync range is 30 frames per second. Well, what happens if your game hits 25? With LFC, what's going to happen is it's going to actually double display the frames. So if you hit 25 frames per second, it's going to actually display that twice, creating the illusion of 50 frames per second to the monitor to allow it to continue to have that instantaneous response. The good news is the frame rate range is so wide in a good LFC monitor that it doesn't matter. If you're getting down that low, you didn't want to be able to watch it anyway. It wasn't a good experience when it gets that low. And most video cards today can maintain above that minimum. So you're in pretty good shape. Now, these are two important things to understand because of where we're going with the rest of this discussion. This is why I wanted to start here. So, first, to enjoy a really great gaming experience, I suggest you look into an adaptive sync monitor. I understand there are other technologies that add to the gaming experience just as much. HDR, if properly implemented, which most monitors don't do, they do a subset of HDR, and I have personally found the experience isn't that good. Choosing the right panel type and all of that comes into play. But for creating a smooth gaming experience, let's start with you want an adaptive sync monitor so that you can have that smooth experience throughout the gaming experience of frame rates, because they're going to go up and down. It always happens. So now that we've got that, and now that we understand how this works, let's begin with how I create a smooth gaming experience for myself. So step one, I have my adaptive sync monitor, and I know my adaptive sync monitor has an upper refresh rate of 144. That's my monitor, 144 hertz. So I want to keep that under 144 hertz. Now, the typical response to that is to use VSync. But if you've ever used VSync before, you will know that it increases the latency. Breaking Dimes has just mentioned he can't see the listener question channel. Let me check that. Read messages. You guys should be able to see that channel. Read messages, send messages. That is set up for everybody to see that channel up there. You should be able to click up there and be able to post questions. Yes, you can. Okay. So there you go. It's right up above this. So what we're gonna be talking about then is how do we get around the problems of VSync, the latency that it introduces, because that latency is going to make the gaming experience bad. We don't want what VSync does. So the first thing I do is I turn off VSync. Now, all I have to do to make that a non-issue, since I'm using an adaptive sync monitor, is to be able to ensure my frame rate doesn't go above the FreeSync range. That's all I want to do. I just need to keep my frame rate under 144 frames per second. And guys, you all know that's not hard to do. It's not hard to do that. So we're trying to create a smooth gaming experience. So we want to keep that out. We want to keep VSync out because it introduces a latency and can occasionally introduce a micro stutter. So we begin with that premise. 144 hertz or whatever the top of your adaptive sync range is what you're going to target. So the next thing I want to do is I want to try to see how my game's going to perform. Now, I've talked about this a lot in the past. I never run games at ultra unless it doesn't matter if I'm running at ultra or not. I'm always running a level below. And the reason I choose that is during the gameplay experience in every game I've ever tested, the level below the highest level looks pretty much the same during gameplay, but it has a better performance range. So we want to begin with running it at high instead of at ultra, and we load it up, we run some testing. We want to see what kind of frame rates we're going to get. Now, a common misconception I see when people talk about behind high refresh rate monitors, they look at a 144 hertz monitor and they think they have to run or should run at 144 frames per second. And that's not true. That's actually a huge misconception that we need to today throw out the window. And what I mean by that is when you look at average frame rates, which is what most people judge, an average frame rate is the middle of a bell curve. This is the middle. That means you're getting faster and you're getting slower frame rates. So when I'm looking at the performance numbers and I run a benchmark, let's say I'm running Division 2 or I'm running Red Dead Redemption 2 or any game with a good built-in benchmark, this makes it really easy to do this. I don't want to run that average frame rate up to 144 hertz. The truth is, I want that average frame rate around 100 to 110 at the most. I know people would be like, oh, but I bought a 144 hertz monitor. I need it to run that fast. No, you don't. You want it to average at a lower speed. And the reason why is at about 110, I'll use Division 2 as an example. At about 110, I notice that my frame rates are often hitting 130 and 135 and even 140. Now, I haven't ever gone above 140, but this means that I'm never exceeding the refresh rate of the monitor. In other words, I'm doing the work of VSync without VSync's mess that it implements. I'm doing it in a much smoother manner. So this allows me to find a great frame rate section and sit in it and do what I want to do. Once we have that target frame rate set in, now comes the tweaking part. Because maybe at that high setting that we discussed, you're not getting to that 100, 110 frames per second. You're getting 70 or you're getting 80, which is still a great gaming experience. But you want to get that number up. You want to get that a little higher. How can you do that? So there's a few core simple solutions, but the core solutions to me tend to drag things one way or another and it becomes a mess. So what I do is I go into the game settings and I start looking at the various setting options. And I have found over the years a few very specific options that I can turn off or turn down and have a really minimal impact to the gaming experience. The first place I want to start with that is shadows. Shadows are enough to drive me nuts in a video game. When you go into these games, they're set at high, they're set at ultra, and you've got these beautiful, crisp shadows, right? You got these amazing shadows. And to me, they're too amazing. We sometimes look at these super high game settings and we talk about reality. We want to look like reality. Well, most of these game settings create hyper reality. If you look at shadows at ultra settings and look at shadows in real life, in most cases, the shadows and ultra settings are just a little too detailed. By turning them down to medium, I have yet to find a game that medium shadows does not, in my opinion, look better to the gameplay. They're a little softer. They're a little more vague in the way they look. They're still there and you can tell what they're attached to, but they're not these super crisp representations that are essentially just blacked out, high detailed chalk lines. So by turning shadows down to medium, you almost immediately get a decent frame rate boost. This helps a great deal. And this is a feature that, as I said, I don't think gets looked at as often. Another feature to look at is particle count. There's going to be different names for this. But basically, the concept behind a particle count setting is, let's say you shoot a wall. Okay, you hit a wall with an RPG, and the RPG explodes, and you've got all these thousands of chunks of concrete and stuff flying around, bouncing on the ground, moving around everywhere. At a higher particle count, there's more of those little items. There's more of this stuff moving and bouncing around and going crazy. And because there's more of this stuff moving and bouncing around going crazy, there's more that has to be generated. Again, I have found tuning that down one notch makes minimal difference in the gameplay experience, but a nice difference in smoothing out the frame rates. And what's happening is we're taking that initial setup that's not achieving the speed we want, and we're watching that frame rate now begin to inch up with every small setting change. We're watching the frame rate begin to inch up until we can hit that 100 to 110 sweet spot that we're looking for in that gaming experience. The last one I'm going to give as an overall constant. These are settings that work every time for me to help. The last one I'm going to give is motion blur. So motion blur is in real life what happens when things move. We don't see frame rates; we see blur. But in video games, they have to create the blur because everything is generated in frames. And this actually adds overhead to the generation of the graphics. It makes the graphics gameplay a little less smooth. It lowers the frame rate because it has to add more information in between the frames to make this work. Most people I know turn off motion blur anyway. The motion blur, and it doesn't really, in my experience, add to the gameplay. It doesn't make the gameplay any better. In fact, it makes it a little harder at times because it's harder to get clear focus when you need it sometimes. And I don't know too many players that like motion blur, so they typically tend to go turn it off. So turning off motion blur, lowering the shadows, and lowering the particle count a long way to making those frame rates come up. If there's a fourth one in there, I would look at tessellation levels. So the idea behind tessellation levels is to help smooth out everything in the game or in the way it looks. It just in the end it just smooths everything. But often the tessellation levels are set really high. Sometimes they've been set ridiculously high. I think a great example of this is The Witcher 3. Was by default at a stupid level, and you could cut it in half. You could cut the setting in half, and you couldn't tell the difference in the gameplay, except it ran much better. So those are the areas that I typically start with the in-game settings to try to up that frame rate if it's too low. Now there are additional things you can do. If the frame rate is still too low, you can try some other settings. You can try going into the overall setting feature and turning down the whole thing and then turning up certain features. Because remember, you don't want that average. We don't want that average to peak up. If it goes much past about 110, 115, then you're going to start seeing frame rates exceeding the top of the refresh rate, and we just defeated the purpose of this. So we've got this. How you do this? You tweak it, you get it into place, you get this frame rate. Now, there's a counter to this argument. What if my frame rates are too high at that setting? Let's say you've got a really great video card, you've got a really optimized game, and you set high, and the frame rates are averaging 130. Well, you go up to the next level of detail. You go ahead and move to Ultra. This is when you move to Ultra. And Ultra will drop the frame rates, guarantee you. And then you can go into the Ultra settings again with the tweaks I've mentioned and tweak it down to get the frame rate back up to where you want it. So the goal here is to optimize through the settings to get an average frame rate of about 110 to 115. This with no VSync. I swear it's amazing how much smoother the gameplay experience becomes for you. It just becomes this wonderful experience. Now, there are some other tricks we can do if we need to make adjustments. Maybe going from high to medium, if you can't get your frame rate up high enough, isn't something you're willing to accept. You don't want to lose that much detail. The detail is important to you in the gameplay experience. Well, the good news is if you're using a Sapphire video card, you've got a fairly simple trick to use, and play on words, and that's using Sapphire's Tricks Boost. You can go into Boost, and you can begin gently lowering the rendering scale at the resolution you want to play at and gain a performance boost. Now maybe you have to only go down to 95% or maybe 93%. I love the fact that we gave you really coarse detail control. But you can take that, make those minor adjustments, and have minimal to no impact on actual visual experience, but be able to get those few extra frames per second if that's what you're looking for. What if you need to go the other way? What if you're already running the game at ultra detail level and you're running the game at everything's maxed out and I'm still getting 140, 180 frames per second. What do I do? How do I get that number down? Well, you've got a couple of tricks still left available to you. Trick one is virtual super resolution, or VSR. So what this will do is if you have a 1080p or a 1440p monitor, it will allow you to actually increase the resolution you render at to make it look like it's a 4K monitor and rendering. Then it'll downscale when it displays. But the actual rendering done by your engine is done at the new higher resolution. Using virtual super resolution, you can often turn off some anti-aliasing because, in essence, that's what a lot of anti-aliasing does at the end of the day. It just does multiple passes instead of a super detailed pass. So turning on virtual super resolution can up your resolution and help you lower that frame rate. What if you don't like virtual super resolution, though, and you still want to find a way to lower the frame rate? Well, AMD has another option that, if properly used, actually works very well, and that's chill. So the concept behind chill is you set an upper and a lower frame rate range, and when those frame rates are exceeded, chill pulls back in. So if it exceeds your upper limit, chill begins downclocking the GPU, reducing the power to bring the frame rate back within the range. The mistake that a lot of people make is that range is very large. They allow it to create a very large range. In effect, they try to create a chilled version of FreeSync. What I have found that works really well, if my frame rates are too high, is to create a very narrow range with chill. So I go into chill and I set the upper limit. Like I said, we've got a 144 hertz monitor. I set the upper limit at about 120, 115. And then I set the lower limit at like 90. And what this does is it downclocks the GPU. It reduces the GPU's power draw to allow everything to stay within that. It ups it if it gets too low. It decreases if it gets too high. And you get the advantage that usually your GPU runs cooler and quieter while using less power while doing this. Now, you may say, well, why don't we use this from the beginning? Why don't we set this up and say, set that upper limit at this and the lower limit at the other and go with it? Because it doesn't always work the way we would like it to. It's a neat feature, but it's not a perfect feature. So, in my opinion, it's more of a feature of last resort. It's the way you fix it when everything else hasn't fixed it. But the goal, as I said at the beginning, is to give you the smoothest gameplay possible. And these are the settings I do. I go through this process with every new game I get. I figure out how to make this work. I don't mess with overclocking because I can, through this method, achieve amazingly smooth gameplay. And it's a much better solution, in my opinion. It's a little more work. It's a little more work, but if the games offer the ability to benchmark, it's relatively simplistic. Now, this raises one last question then. What happens if the game doesn't offer the ability to benchmark? If you can't benchmark with the game, how do you know what the frame rates are? Well, believe it or not, AMD offered you a solution on that. So if you click on AMD software and you go to a home page, you're going to see various games. It's going to tell you what the average frame rate was for the game. If you click on gaming, and let's say I go in here and I click on Red Dead Redemption. And when I click on Red Dead Redemption, I get a performance report. where it tells me what the average frame rate was of my gaming session. Of the times I played over the whole time I played. In this case, from the latest driver updates, it showed me total of 8 hours. Last session was 57 minutes, and over a total of 8 hours in Red Dead Redemption 2, I am averaging 98.3 frames per second. Okay, that's great performance. I'm hitting exactly the numbers I'm wanting to hit. I'm doing what I want to do. Now, that's not as instantaneous of a response as you'd get from an in-game benchmark, but it is a response that, in my opinion, is in some ways a better scale, because this can be looked at over a long period of gameplay, and it can give you the ability to really tweak in the performance. So even without an in-game benchmark, you have tools available to do this. By the way, this discussion is available in a kind of texted form over on SapphireNation.net. I actually wrote an article on this a while back, and I've talked about this at a number of events that I've attended over the years. I've just found it's a wonderful experience. It really smooths out the gameplay experience. And at the end of the day, that's what we all want. We want smooth, clean, enjoyable gameplay experience. So without a guest, this becomes me being a talking head. So we've done almost half of the thing already. The second half, I'm going to leave this wide open to you guys. It's question time. If you've got questions, we can talk about. Like I said, I've done some SFF building over the last month with the Cooler Master NR200 and the Cougar QBX, and I'd be happy to share my experience with either of them. And that smoothing out gameplay or pretty much anything else you want, guys, it's wide open for this month. So go ahead, question lines are open, fire away. By the way, I see Thumper in the channel. Is that the Thumper I knew from Indianapolis? I'm just kind of curious there. And you guys can type in the listener question section. We're going to see if anybody brings any questions. This may be the shortest show we've done yet for the Sapphire Nation podcast. So quiet, dead air, quiet. I haven't had to do a truly solo show for a long time. I guess while I'm waiting on this, I can talk to you guys some about my small form factor build experience. I guess we can do on that. First, a big thank you to Cooler Master. They sent me an NR200 to be able to play with and experience it. NR200 is an amazing case for the money. It sells for $80 if you can find them. They're selling out really fast. And the selling out is a great thing, not just for Cooler Master, obviously. The selling out means there's an interest in small form factor computer building. That there is a serious peak. One of the biggest drawbacks to small form factor computer building has been the fact that we can't get reasonably priced cases. You're having to pay $150, $200, $300 to get a case under 20 liters in size. And the NR200 and the QBX from Cougar both bring in that sub 20 liter size. So I've got to build on this. Just amazing number of cooling options that are available to you. I currently have it built as an air cooling system with a Big Shuriken 3 for the cooler, and then I put a 140 millimeter fan in the side panel to blow in, and it keeps a 3600 nice and cool. Gaming is typically 60C. This case does fit, and I'm really happy with this. It does fit the Sapphire Nitro Plus 5700 XT in it. And I can fit slim 120 millimeter fans underneath it to get it a lot of really good fresh airflow. So this works really well. The Cougar QBX is a nice case, but it's a bit more of a tinkerer case. There are some modding you need to do to it to get the most out of it. I was able to fit a Pulse 5700 XT in the QBX. I'm not sure it could fit a Nitro Plus, and I still had to mod the case slightly even to get the Pulse to fit. But it does fit, so there's the potential for that. So you've got some potentially really nice cases to look at if you want to go small form factor building. And I like small form factor building. I've got more room on my desk. I've got just tons more room. I'm able to build really quiet systems with this. And these good cases that offer 2.5 and 3 slot cards and near full length are still really, really small. It's amazing how compact these cases are. So, as I said, we're still open for questions, guys. Okay, Breaking Dimes, trouble seeing that. Let me find out why. Breaking Dimes, the listener question section is up directly above this chat area where I'm speaking. There's nothing there for him. Is there a... Okay, look next to it at the top where the subtitle is above it, Sapphire Nation Podcast. Check and see if there's an arrow you can down click. And see if that helps. Because I see RGB FTW is seeing it okay. Sapphire owners can't see the channel? You're kidding me. Okay, hold on a second. Let me get this for permissions real quick. I just saw a question pop in. Saps, oh my God. I'm not sure what happened with that. There you go. You should have access to the channel now, guys. That's amazing. Wow. Okay, so RGB FTW, we'll debate that name at another time. This might be a bit off topic, but I've always wondered if Sapphire is also planning to make NVIDIA GPUs. I only get this question about 10 times a week. Sapphire was founded at the time on the principle of only working with ATI, which obviously shifted over to AMD. At this time that I'm aware of, I've never heard discussions to the contrary. The only thing we make are AMD-based products for GPUs. Never say never, but at this time, no, we're just focused on AMD. Breaking Dimes. What are your thoughts on window timers, such as the high precision event timer, causing stuttering and general performance issues? Now you're getting deep into the programming stuff, and to be honest with you, that tends to not be an area I dive into. There's a lot of stuff with the way stuff is programmed. If programmers stuck to the DirectX standard of everything, if everything was built around the DirectX standard, a lot of those issues would disappear. I'm not a big fan of sticking timers into anything to create a level of control. I don't think that it's a good idea. I'm not sure if timers is the accurate way to describe this, but one of the things I did not like about Fallout 4 was the fact that they built everything around a 60 frame per second issue. And basically, if you exceeded this, they force fed you back to 60 frames per second or the game broke. So, yeah, I would say that if event timers are what's causing you a stuttering issue, then you need to turn them off. I've personally not ever messed with them and have never had an issue. So, but again, this isn't an area I tend to focus on. So Breaking Dimes is typing another question here while we wait. Thumper never answered my earlier question. Uh, well, there is something to be said with the power management of systems. That's why when I use chill, I tend to create a very narrow range. AMD stock settings is a very large range, and by creating the narrow range, I limit the ability for all that really aggressive management of the power. So that helped with me when doing it, but I don't need to do it most of the time. Most of the time I'm not having an issue with it. So uh, okay, I see what you're talking about now. You're talking about the ability of the GPU to drop and come back up. Um, yeah, it might be a game to game basis because I'm telling you, I played. Let's see, Division Two, Ghost Recon Breakpoint just recently. MechWarrior 5, Red Dead Redemption 2, some of the new Borderlands stuff. And in none of that stuff, and I haven't messed with any of those settings, in none of that stuff have I seen this issue. Now, I don't play Destiny, and I notice you say that Destiny 2 is where you see it happen the most. And I think this is something that doesn't get discussed often enough. I see this a lot in Reddit and in customer responses to us when they ask for tech support. If you have only one game or even only two games that a particular issue is occurring in, then that issue is more than likely more tied to the game than to the hardware or the drivers. When you see an issue that is across multiple games, that tends to be a hardware or driver related issue. But when you get down to just one or two games, that tends to be a game related issue. Your comment, then you go on to say, as soon as you, for the people that are listening that aren't part of the live stream, as soon as you go into the menu, it hard stutters because the clocks go from 2 gigahertz to 200. Um, I would say that's got to do with the way they program the menuing system. That's my gut reaction is that this is the way the menu system is programmed because I'm not seeing this in other games that I play. I'm not seeing this happen. So it sounds like it's a game design related issue. Now that doesn't mean the drivers can't adjust for it. It doesn't mean that there aren't driver options as you have found with turning off the precision timing that can't get around the problem. But like I said, when it's only in a couple of games, one or two games in your whole library of maybe 30, it's usually something very specific to the game. So it's difficult for the drivers or for the hardware to be the one that has to fix it. Um, you just want an option where and I would definitely pass that along to AMD. I don't think that's a bad idea. An option where you can set the minimum load of the GPU, that it won't allow the speed to go down below a certain point. I don't think that that's a bad option to be able to set. The reason that that option doesn't exist is because of demands from consumers for lower power consumption and lower temperatures. When you're not doing anything with your GPU, you want to be able to cut how much power it draws. You want to be able to cut how much heat it generates. You want to be able to lower all of this. And you get in the catch 22. You've got a few people in a few specific games that want to see a certain feature. And then you've got people in newer games or in other games that don't care about that specific feature. Uh, Earlier drivers used to have this. Okay? Again, this is something I'd point out to AMD. Point out to AMD what you're saying. Get yourself a few friends to help with this. AMD actually has the ability. If somebody knows where it's at, let me know. But they've got a section of their website where you can tell them things you would like to see them work on. And I think this would be a great thing to put into that list and have them work on it. And we got people typing again. I'm trying not to have dead air here, guys. That's what I was saying. I don't know the area of the website. Just a second. I'm going to try to look it up. AMD drivers wish list. Let's do a search here real quick. Um, drivers. Let's try feature request. We can see if we can find it here for you. Feature request. This is at the AMD community. What I would do is go to community.amd.com. I would sign in, and then you can actually go into their forums and make feature requests. That would be a good place to start. So let's see if we get any more questions in here. Like I said, we're about 15 minutes away from being to the full hour almost. So we might cut this a little short because like I said, with somebody else doing it with me, the conversations tend to get bigger. And they become more fun that way. RGB is typing. And I see more than these two guys in here. Come on, somebody's got to have questions about tweaking their system or GPUs or small form factor building or you name it, we'll talk about it. RGB has to go. Thanks, RGB, for stopping by. I appreciate it. And let's see what we got left here. We'll give this a couple more minutes, and if we don't get some conversations rolling, we might end this one a little early. Views on NVIDIA Reflex. Okay. I try to avoid discussing the competition. Okay, so you're talking about the. I had to look this up again real quick just to be sure. You're talking about the API that allows for the reduction of latency within games. Okay. So it's a low latency mode that can be locked into the game. This is similar, by the way, in effect to what's the AMD version called? I'll find it here in a second. You're talking about AMD's anti-lag, I believe. You're talking about something that's very similar to AMD's anti-lag. I can tell you this. I'm not a big fan of proprietary technology from any company. I'm not a big fan of technology that only works in a limited number of games and a limited piece of hardware. I want to see the technology companies. I want to see AMD and NVIDIA compete on the quality of the product they bring to market, not on a driver gimmick that can exist. This is something that I've been adamant about for decades. Proprietary technology is always bad for the gamer at the end of the day. So I'm not a big fan I'm not a big fan of anything that's proprietary in any way. Thoughts on a bunch of people that overclock their stuff and don't stress test it and complain about stuttering and performance issues? I'll give you my thoughts on overclocking. How about that? I'm not a big overclocking fan. I used to be. Back in the day, I used to overclock the crap out of everything. And what happens with overclocking is you get a performance boost, but often it's not enough performance boost to justify what you had to do. Look at what's involved. Okay, if you want to overclock a CPU, you're going to have to buy a better cooler. Now you might buy one anyway because you want quieter operation, but instead of buying a $30 or $40 cooler that achieves the noise level change you want, you're buying a $100 to $150 cooler because you want to overclock to hell and back. You're going to have to buy more expensive RAM, more expensive motherboards to support the overclock that you want to be able to have. So you have to go through a lot of hoops. Now, once you've paid the extra money to achieve the overclock, which was, by the way, according to everybody, free. Once you paid the extra money, now you have to go through the time of proper stability testing. And proper stability testing can take a little while, depending on how stiff the overclock is. And remember, time is money. Has your time no value to you? So the so-called free performance boost from overclocking doesn't really exist. There is a cost. There is a cost for it, but there's a cost after it as well. One of the problems with overclocking I have is anytime you have an issue, anytime you have an instability, the first step you need to take is removing the overclock, because the overclock could be the instability. But people don't do that. They overclock their CPU, they overclock their GPU, and you're right. A game dies or a game has an issue, and the first response is, what's wrong with this? Did you try turning off the overclock? And I'm amazed how many people will tell you no. So for an extra 3 or 4 frames per second here and there, I haven't found that overclocking gives me enough return to justify it. And to be honest, I've reached the point now, thanks to Sapphire's Tricks Boost, that I just see no need to overclock. I can take in Tricks Boost and I can set a detail level reduction to 95%. And then I can turn on the image sharpening feature. I can't see the detail reduction, but I just got anywhere from a 5 to an 8% performance boost, which is good for many overclocks. I download to 90%, and now I'm getting a 10% performance boost and still can't see the detail reduction. I can go down to 85% with 4K or 1440p, and it's really, you have to really stressfully look for it to see the detail reduction. But now I'm getting as much as a 12 to 13% performance boost. By the way, I'm doing all that without increasing heat, without increasing noise, without increasing power draw, and without reducing stability. So I've reached the point that there's no need to overclock, thanks to programs like Tricks Boost, thanks to games that have render scaling capability built into them. There's overclocking for the typical gamer just doesn't offer enough benefit to be worth the time and cost necessary. Let's see. Let's see what else we got here. Free power. You mean free performance? You mean free space heater? Yeah. In fact, I've often gone the other way. I'm finding this with small form factor builds. There is a really neat feature that AMD built into the Ryzen CPUs, and it's called Eco Mode. And what Eco Mode does is it turns down certain features to take a chip to the next lower TDP range. So you can take a 95 or 105 TDP chip down to 65 TDP. And you can take a 65 TDP chip or a 60 TDP chip down to 45. And so you've got this lowering of the power draw, and you've got this lowering of the power limits, and this does result in a performance hit. But I've managed to take a 3600. Again, I'm going to use Red Dead Redemption 2 as an example of this. I managed to take a 3600 and lower that with the TDP, meaning I could run a lesser cooler, or I could get quieter operation with the cooler I'm running. And my frame changes were like in the 2% range, maybe 3%. And when I look at the clock speed differences, I essentially lost 200 megahertz. So there's actually something to be said for downscaling at times, because it reduces the power draw, it reduces the heat, it reduces the noise, and it means you potentially might not have to spend the extra money. So let's see here. Because I didn't know anything about overclocking. There you go. Don't. My personal experience is as a gamer, and this is the perspective I come to with everything I try to talk to with this. As a typical PC gamer, overclocking doesn't give you enough return to justify the cost or the time. Now, if you have a really old system and you're trying to extend its life, maybe. If you have if this is something that you enjoy as a hobby, you love the tweaking, you love the fight to get the extra frame per second, the extra 1% on a benchmark, more power to you. Enjoy it. But for 95% of the PC gaming world, there's just no real advantage. Let's see here. Breaking Time says one issue is it's AMD's drivers for most people is what they think. Thanks to good boosting algorithms, 6 hertz FX. Okay. Yeah, we've reached the point now with modern CPUs and modern GPUs. There's a built-in boost anyway, and the built-in boost does a really good job of giving good performance. And I just don't see the need anymore outside of the fun of doing it. And if you enjoy doing it, absolutely, more power to you. Go have a blast. But for typical PC gamer, no. You know what? I know you got buddies. You got buddies in your community going, dude, you got to overclock it, dude. You won't believe what it does, dude. I'm telling you, from practical experience, no. Don't worry about your benchmark scores. Worry about your gaming experience. The tips I've given you today, or the use of Trix Boost, will do more to enhance your gaming experience than the time and money you will invest in overclocking. And they literally cost you nothing but a little bit of time. People are going to have a stroke about Zen 2's boosting and its voltages. Zen 2 offered some interesting challenges. It does have some voltage boosts. Like I said, I use eco mode for my small form factor builds. I use the eco mode. It reduces the voltage usage. It reduces the clock speed a little bit, but that's all right. That's all right. I'm okay with reducing the speed a little bit. Again, the tips at the beginning of the video, making use of Sapphire Trix Boost. These are ways you can achieve that better gaming performance, that better gaming experience of a smoother gameplay, and you don't have to mess with overclocking. You'll spend a lot less time testing this and using this because you'll be busy playing your games, enjoying them. You'll spend a lot less time and effort in it than with an overclock, and you'll be amazed at how much better you can have for the experience than what an overclock can deliver for you. There we go. All right, we got time for maybe one more question, and then we're going to pack this in. So if anybody else has anything else. Give this a, sorry about that. I let some dead air slip in. Okay, the wife walked past and was kind of giving me the face and closing the door a little bit. So we got time for one more question. All right, let's see what we get here. Favorite features of the Radeon driver suite that improves performance? Well, like I said, well, let's just go through them real quick. It'll be easier to just pull them up so I can see them while I'm talking about them. Okay, so I make use of anti-lag. I'm not sure how much of a real performance experience change it's made, but I make use of it. Chill has the potential to be really useful. Radeon Boost, I've not been that impressed with. I like Trix Boost better because it's a comprehensive solution. It's not dependent on certain factors, and it just works across the board. And I think I've had better experience. Image sharpening, I really enjoy, and I make use of on a regular basis. That's about it. The image sharpening and the anti-lag are really the two features I personally make the most use of. And because and breaking dimes, I'll get with you in a minute and explain why. We're going to do something to say thank you for all the time you put in today for the show. We appreciate you. We appreciate all of you that are taking the time to listen to this after the fact or showing up here live. Showing up live, though, is when the fun's going to begin. And next month, we've already got some people lined up to come in next month to talk to us about some stuff they want to do with their company and what they are bringing to the industry and PC gaming and how it relates. So that'll be a much more exciting show than I think today's show was. Well, now they do. Upscale rendering is available. That's virtual super resolution. So if you're running on a 1080p monitor, you enable virtual super resolution, and it will allow you to render at 4K. So, or you're going the other way. I'm sorry. You want to render at 1080p but display at 4K. Okay, I get what you're saying. At that level, well, it's not terrible. It can be okay. I get what you're saying though, and again, this is something you bring up to AMD. You let them know that this is what you're interested in. Visit them on Facebook and Twitter, and send them notes and say, hey, these are the features I'd like to see. You never know. You never know what's going to happen. You might be amazed at how quick somebody wants to add these features besides you, and that your voice might be the one that makes them turn the corner. On that note, gentlemen, let's get Breaking Dime's last reply in here real quick. He's typing. We're going to go ahead and get out of here. And so what we're going to do is, and I'll let everybody know this, Breaking Dimes, I appreciate the time and effort you put in this podcast to bring questions and comments and drive thoughtful conversation. So here's what I'm going to do for you, brother. I'm going to get off of here, and I'm going to get your contact information, and I'm going to send you a Pulse 5500 XT. How does that sound? Does that sound like a winner? I think that would be cool. I think that way I can say thank you. I don't get to do this very often, but every now and then I get to do this. So you're going to need to DM me your shipping information, but we'll take care of this. We'll get a video card out to you. Get your 5500 XT to play with. So on that note, guys, I am getting out of here. Thank you for all taking the time to join us. Make sure you scream and yell at your friends and family. Get them to join the Sapphire Nation Discord. And next month, like I said, I'll be announcing closer to it, but we'll announce who we have coming on board as a guest and our topic. And I think you're going to enjoy it. I think you're going to have a lot of fun. Until next month, guys, thanks for hanging out. Thank you for all of you that have supported us here at Sapphire. And I'll see you in a month. Bye.